Hello and welcome to our Operation Citadelle AAR for the turn-based strategy game, Germany at War. Now this title is fairly similar in the veins of the Allied Corps and Panzer Corps line of games. It's for players who enjoy those titles, although wish for a little bit more complexity and more depth. Operation Citadelle was the first portion of the Battle of Kursk. It was when the Germans tried to regain the strategic initiative. Our first objective will be breaching the Soviet defensive belt that they've set up here. First and foremost, we'll bring in our air support, a mixture of Junkers dive bombers and tactical bombers to whittle down the portion of the belt here. What we're going to do is that we're going to make a small breach inside their ranks here, and then stream our tanks through it. The objectives inside this game are given successively. We're given 6 turns to take the first 3 initial objectives, and after that we will be given more, provided that we accomplish the initial few. What I'm going to do here is that because we have such a short amount of time, I will be streaming our panzer tanks through this little gap and focusing on the Russians' second belt of defense. Like the Panzer Corps line of games, how attacks are essentially conducted inside this is that they follow an I-go-you-go system. Each player takes their turn independent of the other one's actions. How flanking attacks are again simulated the same way as the Panzer Corps line of games. Essentially, if you stack multiple units near one particular target, the defender will be essentially given a debuff for the amount of units next to it, provided that they have unused attacks. Now, since we're only given 2 bomber units capable of providing effective support, I'm going to have to use our fighters here to do some rudimentary damage to the the first belt of defense. We're going to push up on this flank later on the second turn, because I want to use some of these infantry units and some of these auxiliary units to really drive forward. You may have noticed that, for one, multiple units start off with different health levels represented by the numbers under the little icon. Inside Germany at War, various different unit compositions are simulated. For example, the bigger units with the hit points exceeding 10 represent divisions, whereas gradually smaller units have less and less hit points. Here you're watching me select our reserve forces and essentially reassigning them reinforcements and more supplies such as ammunition and fuel. Depending on the level of realism, you may or may not have to think about resupplying your troops with fuel and ammunition and the associated costs that go along with this. The AI will be trying to use similar tactics against us. Likewise here, the Russian AI is bringing the full force of multiple units onto one of my panzer divisions. On the start of turn 2, the weather changes from being clear skies to cloudy with a little bit of rain. With that being said, our aerial operations will be affected. It looks like the Russians are trying to bring in some of their bombers, so I've decided to redeploy our fighters to take these targets out. Likewise, our reserves are actually being targeted. While they are now reinforced and fully geared, I've decided to send them to the front. On the front lines, the Totenkopf armored division has actually taken quite a little bit of a beating, so we're going to be sending them to the rear to refit with new equipment. The second line of Russian defenders will definitely be harder to take over than the first line. As some of you may have noticed, that the attacking troops get hit by the enemy artillery in a retaliatory barrage whenever we try to attack. Like the Panzer Corps line of games, whenever we try to attack an enemy unit that is covered by their artillery, we may have to suffer the retaliatory barrage. Now that we have tactical bombers and Stukas at ready, we're going to deploy them over here. Once again, we're going to try to make a small breach and then send in our armored units. In conjunction with our artillery, we were actually able to pick off a few of the different emplacements set up here by the Russians. I'm going to try to use our infantry units and auxiliary battalions and whatnot, such as the Stugs and infantry here, to clear the way for my panzers. Later on inside the scenario, we will definitely not be as fully equipped as we are here, and it is important to keep our panzer divisions well stocked. On the enemy turn, a series of light attacks are essentially conducted upon our units. One of the important things to note is that the Russian attacks seem to be fairly mild, while they put up a good fight on the defensive. Essentially, the enemy defensive lines' bunker units will just kind of bleed themselves out on our troops. Likewise, their tanks will do a similar thing. The two things that we have to keep a watch out for right now is Russian armor such as T-34s and KV tanks appearing on the battlefield, as well as Russian air. On the start of the third turn, we have ample resources, so we are going to essentially rebuild the Totenkopf armored division. We're going to give them more men, more ammunition, and more fuel. Our tanks on the front lines look like they're doing fairly well for now, so we won't necessarily need to think about reinforcing them just yet. Our main worry on this part of the battlefield is simply trying to take out the Russian armor elements, as well as making a little bit of a run for our third objective located on the right side of the map. You may have noticed that there were quite a lot of defensive fortifications and positions located on the other side of the Donets River. Well, instead of actually going and piercing that line of defenses, I'm just simply going to bypass those by eliminating the weak defenders over here and going for Kroch, located on the right side of the screen, from our initial breach here. We're going to have to start clearing out this town in a little bit. First, we're going to get rid of some of the defenders here, such as these anti-tank guns, which pose a threat to our tanks. The Russian artillery isn't all that devastating against our tanks, so we should be able to weather out an attack on this town. What will be a problem is dislodging the infantry inside within a reasonable amount of time, and taking reasonable amounts of casualties doing so. I'm going to try to get our auxiliary units here, such as the Stugs and the infantry, to play more of a direct role. The following Russian turn was fairly fast. The Russians did try to get a few bombs off on our troops, but apart from that, only minor retaliatory attacks happened. On the following turn, we finally make a drive towards the third objective with our tanks. We have ample amounts of panzer divisions, so I figured I might as well commit 3 to that objective. 3 to take it, and then 1 to garrison it to hold from the wave of counterattacks. In the meantime, our artillery regiments are starting to run out of ammunition, so we will have to be refitting these. The game can work on 2 different settings. You can set it so that your resources are only spent on reinforcing your troops, or alternatively you can play with the detailed supply, which it costs to actually resupply your troops with ammunition and fuel. Following another uneventful turn, we have essentially gained control of all 3 major objectives located on the map now. Although the presence of Russian T-34s is a issue, we are currently focused on really penetrating the last portions of the defensive line here. Artillery pieces inside this game don't seem to go down as easily as inside the Panzer Corps series of games. With 3 different tank divisions, I predict that this objective will fall fairly easily. One of the things special about the Russian artillery pieces is that the Russian ZIS line of weapons were actually meant to be both artillery pieces and anti-tank guns. They were a sort of multi-function tool, really, multi-function cannon, and I believe they were also supposed to function as flak batteries as well. After penetrating the defensive belt, only localized defenders were present in the following objectives. Here you'll see that a massive Russian armored force was actually in the process of hitting one of our armored divisions. You may have noticed that on the map portion here, you'll notice that two of the 3 objectives inside the second series of positions here are actually undefended. The Russians seem to be focusing on this town mainly here with strong tank divisions on our left flank as well. Apart from that, there is very little resistance behind the Russian defensive belt. We're going to try to avoid taking down the enemy artillery pieces here and just entirely bypassing them. On this turn, mainly troop movement happened with the odd little bit of fighting here, trying to secure this village. Russian T-34s and KV-1s are definitely a match for our Panzer IV tanks. The best way to bring them down is actually with close air support in the form of Stuka bombers. Now, for the majority of the battle, I have been keeping our air units in the back here simply because they do require a little bit of ammunition. They had to resupply. Inside this game, you can actually specialize your troops with various different little perks. Inside the campaign, you will be able to keep a core amount of troops with you and essentially level them up as you go. Here what I've done is that I've gotten our Stuka dive bombers and I've given them the little bonus to attacking armored units, and I'm going to send these into the fray against the Russian armor. On this turn, we essentially take out the remaining armored pieces that the AI has here. Our dive bombers are fairly useful near this town, and our remaining Stubbs and other divisions were actually able to clear out the majority of the enemy tanks. Our artillery is actually fairly effective by itself when taking on armored units. On our left flank, we've actually been able to almost encircle one of the remaining T-34 divisions. As soon as that is eliminated, we should have no problem advancing. After taking out the second 3 objectives and ending the second phase of the scenario, I've decided to essentially rearm our troops and re-equip them. And now that they are essentially rearmed and refitted and resupplied with fuel, we are going to essentially push for the last 2 objectives, Kursk and another village over here over the River Sen. The majority of our forces were concentrated here, taking the bridgehead and eliminating the last few armored units on the map. In the meantime, Kursk was essentially undefended, with only 3 infantry regiments and a single Jagdpanther battalion. We were actually able to overwhelm the city and take it over. After taking Kursk, I actually noticed that we were essentially given 20 turns to finish the scenario. Of those 20 turns that we were allotted, we actually had about 4 or 5 remaining. This is Pewpewchewchew. I hope you guys enjoyed the AAR, and be sure to like and subscribe for more.